All right, everyone, let's get going. Thank you for joining me, and welcome to episode 40 of This Week is Live. I'm your host, Raymond Flochat from MXDWN.com. That's Mixdown. So glad to see you well. Thanks for joining us. And can you believe it's been 40 episodes? That's right, a 4 with a 0 at the end. There has been double digits and then some of this show where we bring you headlines from all around the worlds of entertainment and then also stories and apparently now interviews as well as we start to bring you more and more interview content and other great fun video stuff that we're up to. So there is a ton of stuff that's going on in the realm of entertainment and all the different areas and mediums that we cover. And it is, if I could give it to you in one word, chaos. It's kind of nuts on every single direction. We've got a whole bunch of stuff coming to you in the worlds of the strikes that are happening and more inclement weather getting in the way of live music and other Michigashin drama across all the different verticals that we talked to you about. I want to indicate that, like the last several shows that we've been doing, we have our final video interview coming from Summer Game Fest. And today's video interview is with Kyle Rowley, game director, and Molly Maloney, principal narrative designer from Remedy Entertainment for the upcoming game Alan Wake 2. Really fantastic kind of sci-fi, I don't want to say sci-fi, kind of like a detective horror kind of story operating in multiple kind of realities. And the first one came out almost over a decade ago, and now this is the sequel coming out in October. So stick around at the end of the show after the stories and the editorial comment. We're going to have that interview for you. It's going to be our final of all of our Summer Game Fest interviews that we've been bringing you all these last couple of months. But let us begin with headlines because there's a lot of ground to cover, and we're going to try to tear through all of this as quickly as we can. So you've obviously been hearing us talk about in the world of movies and television about how the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, and the SAG-AFTRA, the Screen Actors Guild for Film and Television Audiences, strikes that have basically kind of brought movies and television and production studios behind them to a grinding halt. And right now, the differences cannot be bridged, the twain between them cannot be met, and ultimately, right now, everything's just kind of, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? And, eventually those TV shows and movies you like, they're going to kind of run out. Maybe a few independent production companies will find a way to find a foothold and to be able to move forward in that respect. But ultimately, right now, everything's kind of at total gridlock. Now, interestingly, because there hasn't been much talk, you hear a lot about the kind of tit for tat over what's going on and how things are basically trying to be negotiated and who's posturing in what way in terms of the world, the media, the press, hearts and minds of people. We don't hear much about the impact. Now, today, we basically have a tiny snippet. I wouldn't call this necessarily like a bulletproof assessment, but it's telling in terms of what's going on in a couple different ways. Warner Brothers Discovery, which is, of course, one of the major production houses and, of course, where HBO lives, and not to mention Warner Brothers Pictures and everything, has basically updated their guidance. Now, for those of you that don't follow the stock market or day trading or options or any of that craziness, guidance is something that publicly traded companies basically issue indicating, here's what we project that we're going to make. And then a big part of what doesn't happen to their stock price, and this is of course emotionally on the the behalf of traders who are buying and selling their stocks, not necessarily a rule, but in terms of how traders do and don't decide to buy or sell stock from a particular company has a lot to do with often how they're doing in terms of their guidance, how they're doing in terms of whether they're meeting that guidance and whether they're coming close to what they said or above, or they're coming in behind. Well, Warner Brothers Discovery has ratcheted down their guidance for their projected incomes between 3 to 500 million. So they're projecting already this year, just this year so far, that they are going to make $3 to $500 million less than they would have had the strike not happened or had the strike been resolved quickly before anything could have stopped. Now, before you get any, if you're a person on the behalf of the strikers, the workers, the people who are trying to get more from the production studios, before you get too excited about that, that puts them still in the range of 10.5 to 11 billion in revenue. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily means anything positive or negative for either side, but if you're talking about a strike, most of this comes down to who can hold out the longest, right? Who can extract the biggest concessions, because this is like a war. Nobody really wins. It's all just kind of a mess. Everybody comes to the middle as much as they can. And when everybody ultimately agrees this is good enough or as much as we think we can get, then people go back to work. So it's a bad scene for everyone, no matter what happens. But ultimately, if you're looking at just one of the major production companies, Warner Brothers Discovery, they're still going to make 10.5 billion. That still feels like a big war chest to me, and that's not a good sign for hopefully getting the strike resolved and getting people back to work and getting people more what they deserve. Um, Elsewhere, and we talked quite a bit last week about inclement weather and how that's affecting things. The attendees, somewhere in the neighborhood of 70,000 of the annual Burning Man event. Okay, now this isn't exactly a music festival in any respect. Certainly, bands and DJs have always played there, and people just play music and everything. This is not an organized concert or a festival in a conventional sense. Burning Man is something, if you don't know, happens out in the desert of Nevada, an area they call Black Rock City, and it's way out in the middle of nowhere, and people kind of go to live in a different way for a week. It's meant to be, a little bit more of a freewheeling hippy dippy kind of thing. And people go, they trade, they live, they relax. It's out in nature, and ultimately, it's meant to be kind of not like the big capitalistic affair of major festivals and stuff that we have. Once again, just to be clear, not really necessarily built around music. People just to go. Sometimes famous people and bands play, but ultimately people go just to be a part of that experience. And if you live in Southern California, there's a whole armada of people that are super passionate about Burning Man and love to go every single year, and they will preach to you about how wonderful it is. It's a big thing down here in Southern California, in the Los Angeles area. I myself have never gone. Not a big person for camping necessarily, so probably not my cup of tea. However, at the same time, a lot of people do. So, unfortunately, there was an unusual to the Nevada desert. If you've ever been to Nevada, it's a big freaking desert. It just doesn't kind of ever be anything other than dry and hot. Well, apparently, there was a slow moving rainstorm that turned this massive area where all of the Burning Man attendees usually are into like a bog, muddy trespass, just impossible to get through, impossible to do anything. And as a result of which, a shelter in place order was issued to the people that were there. Many people just decided to walk on out. The event goes for numerous days. It's not just a 1 or 2 day thing. And numerous people decided to hitchhike their way out through the mud for who knows, God knows how long and God knows what weather. But that still left something in the neighborhood of 70,000 people trapped, waiting for things to calm down, waiting for the roads to be passable. It's not many roads in and out of that thing, if you've ever seen video footage of what it looks like. Apparently, hilariously, both Diplo and Chris Rock were at this event this year and got stuck and also hitchhiked their way out. And there's social media footage of them being picked up by like a random fan. And then as they hitchhiked their way out, and they were in the back of a truck heading out of the event. So apparently by press time now, apparently finally kind of cleared out everyone on their way home. Haven't heard otherwise, haven't found otherwise that anyone's still stranded there. But thankfully, it sounds like for the most part, people got out of the event and the site, Black Rock City. There are reports that perhaps one person died, but there isn't much in the way of details of what happened, who that was, or what the circumstances was. It might have had something to do with the initial rainstorm. Who knows? I don't want to speculate or extrapolate too much on that, not knowing more details yet. And then in another round of our every week, we have to talk about someone out here loves dying. We have to do this again. And Steve Harwell, who has basically been a beloved singer coming all the way from the 90s, being a part of this was kind of the crop of 90s era bands that had a lot of one-hit wonders. He was the singer of Smash Mouth. And ultimately, there was just a time in the mid to late 90s, you had your Blues Travelers and you had your Toadies, and you had tons of bands that would have like 1 or 2 songs that become popular. And Smash Mouth was a really, really big success in the late 90s behind their songs Walking on the Sun and, of course, All Star. I think probably most human beings out there have heard the song with him singing Can't Get Enough of You Baby. I mean, everybody knows this freaking band. They were everywhere. They were a complete market saturation at one point. Well, he has passed away on September 4th at the age of 56, reportedly, according to his representatives, due to acute liver failure. We bring this up not necessarily because Smash Mouth is a band that we've talked about a lot on Mixdown. We have, to some extent. We've had people cover them, shoot them live, but, while he was still alive as a singer of the band a few years back. But because apparently it's been kind of a rough stretch at the end of his life, there was a story we covered kind of in the throes of the pandemic where Smash Mouth was playing a thing called the Big Sip Beer Festival in upstate New York. And ultimately, he had what could only be described as a really horrible performance. And, cursing at the audience seemed, I don't want to clinically say it, but allegedly intoxicated, inebriated, something that looked in the realm of a Nazi salute. Probably wasn't meant to be that, but ultimately it was a scandal and a controversy. It went viral. People were pigpiling on the band for his performance, and then it was announced basically right after that he was retiring from touring, and the band went on without him. Basically the guy had made the band famous. This was coming back to October 13th, 2021. apparently in the time after that, it was reported that, Harwell had two kind of chronic illnesses that he was contending with: cardiomyopathy, which is a heart condition, and I am totally going to pronounce this wrong, but Vermisk encephalopathy, which is a neurological disorder. So unfortunately, he has passed away, and rest in peace to Steve Harwell at the age of 56. And in other chaotic news in the world of music, Electric Zoo New York happened this weekend. Now, unless you're a big fan of EDM or progressive house music, you might not be too familiar with what this festival is. This is a huge festival, and it's kind of the East Coast version of what used to be here very big in Los Angeles, the Electric Daisy Carnival. Electric Daisy Carnival happened in LA till there was a bunch of controversies, and then it moved to Las Vegas, and that's basically comfortably where it's sat since, I don't know, Vegas having a greater tolerance from a city official standpoint to the kinds of things that could go wrong with tens of thousands of kids listening to dance music and any amount of drugs that might come with that. And ultimately, EDC's been comfortably in New York, and then for many years, Electric Zoo. EDC was in Vegas, and then Electric Zoo was very happily happening in New York. Apparently, ownership changed in recent years, and a whole bevy of things happened all in a short couple of days. And details are still kind of rolling out about what exactly went wrong. So the first day of the event was canceled. Didn't happen. Chainsmokers were set to headline. Didn't happen. Nobody got to go in. Nobody got to see anything. Day two, people got to go in, but the main stage area wasn't open until like 4:30, 5 o'clock. So things got delayed. And then in day three, by about apparently 6:30 p.m., coming into the main, prime time hours of the event, the festival announced it had reached capacity and that nobody else is going to be allowed in, ticket holders or not. Now, how that happens in a festival where they're certainly acutely aware of what their attendance, like from a fire marshal standpoint, is, how it got to be that they filled up, I don't know what that is or how that happens. Maybe it was like people gate crashing and sneaking in, but there's social media footage that came about in the reporting and all these events, which basically shows the police kind of trying to not let people in, say no one else is allowed in, we're at capacity, and then the people just crash the gates, they bowl the gates over, the cops get out of the way, and thousands more kids just rush in as fast as they can because they want to see whatever they can. And who blames them? I mean, well, I do blame them for their stampeding, but at the same time, can't entirely blame them wanting to get in. They paid a significant amount of money to go to this festival. Festivals are not cheap. So details are starting to trickle out about what happened and why this is all going down. Initially, the organizers of Electric Zoo indicated that there were supply chain issues, and that prevented them from being able to finish the main stage on time. Now, that's interesting, but now a report from Billboard is indicating that they did not have the permits needed to have the stage from the city of New York. And this is Billboard saying that they have sources within the promoter of the festival. And also, many fans did not receive their wristbands, and they're claiming, this is of course all sources that Billboard has in their reporting, that there was inspections happening at the site mere hours before it was scheduled to open, and that several safety and security issues had to be fixed before they could open. So the sources are claiming that it wasn't a supply chain issue, that there were certain things that are just about public health and safety that weren't, allegedly weren't where they should be. And then effectively that's what caused them to cancel the first day of the event. And how we got to the end of the third day, where ultimately they, had to cut capacity at 6:30 p.m., that is a complete mystery to me at this point, and I'm sure we're going to have more reporting on this. They did promise a full refund when they put the announcement out of anyone who couldn't get in, and most likely, I'm going to just guess on this one, the bands like the Chainsmokers that were scheduled to play on day one, they probably are still going to have to pay them. I don't know that from anything that they're indicating. I'm not privy to contracts or anything like that, but I'm just going to go on a limb and guess that that's probably going to be the case. Elsewhere, and we've talked to you a little about this in the past, this is kind of a slow-moving story, so this is interesting, so I just want to kind of keep this in our minds as far as anybody out there who's watching the show that's a big fan of video games. Eurogamer, which is one of the largest video game journalism websites for all of the European continent, has indicated that at Gamescom the other week, Nintendo did indeed show a new version of the Nintendo Switch. And that ultimately it was shown just to industry insiders and partners. So that basically means developers, major developers, and kind of as like a toolkit of like, here's what it's going to look like. Here's what its rendering capabilities are going to be. Now, nobody at Nintendo is saying anything official. Neither are any of the partners. But apparently, allegedly, this is something that's happening. So there might be a new Nintendo console sooner than we all think. It's apparently coming. We'll see. We'll keep you posted as we have more information. And then, in the way of a couple other of interesting pieces of news, just that I thought were kind of an interesting connection to everything else that we've been talking about. So we've talked a lot about the WGA and the SAG-AFTRA strikes. Okay, and ultimately, now there's another strike looming. This is another piece of the same puzzle for largely the similar reasons, but there is an interactive media division of SAG-AFTRA. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what that means video games. Okay. Now, when video games are made, there's an army of developers and programmers and designers, and there aren't really set unions for those folks. But the talent, the voice talent, the acting talent, and or motion capture talent, there are. And this is where SAG-AFTRA is one of the main unions where they could potentially be a part of. So what has now happened is in the run-up, they are attempting to renegotiate their overall contract with the major production companies. So kind of like how in movies and television you have your Netflixes, your ABCs, your Disneys, your Warner Brothers, all those major companies, that are making content. Well, in the world of video games, some of the biggest ones are Activision, EA, Epic Games, Take-Two, WB Games. There's a whole bunch, but there's several, like your Microsoft, your big production houses that make lots of games. And ultimately what's happened is that SAG-AFTRA has voted given authorization that they wanted to be that they can declare a strike if this next round of negotiations does not come through on favorable terms. And what they're going to do is basically be able to say it doesn't directly initiate a strike. It's not saying we're on strike right now, but it authorizes them to declare a strike if the video game companies fail to negotiate fairly. If they don't get terms that they want, then they can put it to their voting body and say, are we going on strike or not? And I mean, just looking at the climate, it's probably going to happen if there isn't terms found that they find favorable. And of course, kind of just like the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes, one of the big sticking points is AI, wanting to extract an agreement in terms of AI and the usage of it to, eradicate people's ability to make a living in this industry. And then they're also looking for an 11% retroactive expiration and 4% increase in the second and third years of the agreement necessary to members' wages to keep up with inflation. So there's that thing again. We've been talking about almost since the first month of this show, the rising cost of everything and people needing to make more money to be able to have the same standard of living that they had, which is a huge, ugly problem. And then lastly, we haven't had a chance to talk about this too much on the show, but Yellowstone. Those of you that are big TV fans, you're probably aware of Yellowstone. And there's a good section of the populace of America that thinks Yellowstone is the best show on television right now. Now, that could be a lot of different things, and it depends on how you look at it. Like, there's things like Wednesday on Netflix that are immensely popular, and no one really knows for sure how much traffic that, and how many viewers and everything that a show like Wednesday is getting. But at the same time, as far as terrestrial television, cable, whatever that has always meant to the world of television, then, Yellowstone has been consistently one of the most popular shows on TV these last few years, led by Kevin Costner and ultimately written, directed, executive produced by Taylor Sheridan, who's become TV's new kind of Svengali, kind of running everything and having numerous shows like 1883 and 1923 and, Mayor of Kingstown, and ultimately just a giant success. Taylor Sheridan's a massive success story coming on the heels of one of the finer movies of the last 15 years in Hell or High Water. And ultimately Yellowstone becoming a wildfire success. Its star, Kevin Costner, also one of the executive producers, won a Golden Globe, right? Coming right off the heels of the pandemic. And then everything kind of fell apart. And it's kind of murky in terms of exactly what happens, is the kind of thing that ultimately isn't going to be talked about very openly for quite a long time, and contracts and legality and lawyers and all that. But they were coming into season 5 of Yellowstone. They'd kind of decided to break it into 2 very big parts, a la what The Walking Dead did for a lot of years. And first half of the season is pretty long, and then the second half of the season is very long. And apparently also thinking to ending the show with the 5th season, and everything kind of stopped right as they finished production with the first half of season 5. And everything's been ground to a halt ever since. Now, what had happened was that allegedly there was a certain number of days that Kevin Costner was required to film his scenes for his part in the show. And then, as sources from various publications were citing at the time, there was a negotiation breakdown where Kevin Costner wanted to have less days to film. This is all what was alleged from inside sources at the time. And ultimately, that's where everything kind of just stopped. Now, as time has gone on, it's come out that there was a show that he had been given the funding, the opportunity to make kind of a passion project, a series of movies calling Horizon, an American Saga. And that might have been part of the kind of the difficulty there. Taylor Sheridan indicated he really believed that they should be able to figure out a way to work it out and that everything should be able to come back together. And that ultimately that there should be a way that they could make it happen, but it still hasn't. There hasn't been any kind of announcement. So just as things have kind of come through, the Hollywood Reporter has got the first few quotes to come from Kevin Costner about any of this. And it's still kind of cryptic, but it hints that things are certainly not going well. So one of the most popular shows on TV, it may not end, or maybe it ends without its star. Maybe he gets written out of the show right at the pinnacle of its popularity. Who knows, right? But here's what Kevin Costner had to say, which is, I think, interesting, even in terms of a little bit of a clapback, which is, it's a little disappointing that the number one show on television and I'm not participating. I'll probably go to court over it. These are Kevin Costner's words. Later, he indicated he wanted to be a part of season 6 and said, quote, "I couldn't help them anymore. We tried to negotiate. They offered me less money than previous seasons, and there were issues with the creative." So we'll keep you posted as there's more information there. And obviously, just like everything else in the world of television, everything's sidelined behind the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes. So there's not going to be anything anyways with all that going on. And who knows, this goes to court. It could get ugly. It could take a very long time. Ultimately, it's going to be a long time, if at all, before fans of Yellowstone get to see what would have been the finale of the story. Taylor Sheridan kind of indicating quite heavily that Kevin Costner's character, the lead patriarch Dutton of the family, might not have made it to the end of the story anyways. So who knows? There's also rumors that, haven't been confirmed yet that the characters might kind of splinter off into a side story where it might be starring Matthew McConaughey. I don't know. We'll find out. We'll keep you posted as we know more. So before we get into today's feature interview, just wanted to tell a brief editorial comment and just kind of something that had been crossing my mind. We spent a lot of time in this show talking about interesting things from the history of music or movies or games or TV, things that are just something that's interesting to explore, or in some cases, just personal anecdotes and how various pieces of entertainment culture have affected my world and my life and just things that I want to bring attention to. Ultimately, today, the thing that I find myself thinking is just kind of an amorphous subject. Just wanted to speak about that for a couple minutes, and then we're going to get straight into our interview with Kyle Rowley and Molly Maloney from Remedy Entertainment. So stick around for that. But I want to talk a little bit about just gratitude. So I had a birthday recently, and now as I joke to friends and family when that happened, this is now my 43rd trip around the sun. So, I don't know how the hell I got to be 43. It certainly doesn't feel like I'm 43. I still feel like a ripe old 28 at heart, and whatever that means. And I could probably issue that as some level of denial and kind of that be where things stand. But ultimately, it's been a wild, crazy trip. I've done a lot of things. I've gone places, experienced things, been to different places on this planet, far more than I anticipated, which I didn't think I'd see very many when I was younger, but, done a lot of things, been a lot of places, met a lot of people, had a lot of fun, accomplished a lot of things. I'm very proud of all the things I've done. But the gratitude that I'm speaking to right now is something that I don't shift gears long enough to say usually, which is a gratitude for my health. And it's a gratitude for the ability to be able to draw air every day and do what I'm doing. It's not a fatalistic thing about life and death I'm talking about here, in spite of the shirt that I'm wearing. And that's a weird coincidence, I'll admit. But no, just in a general sense of knowing and recognizing, and maybe that's just something that comes with age, of the gratitude that it still works. There isn't that to be said for everyone. Tons of people, and even friends of mine from the same age bracket, didn't make it this far. Don't get to keep doing this every day. Don't get to keep moving and making choices and making mistakes or living and laughing and loving or being happy or excited or feeling like they failed. I mean, it's a pretty wonderful thing that for whatever reason this all works and we are able to be alive and we are able to, that it finds a way to keep going in spite of the duress, in spite of the challenges, that it finds a way to rebound. And even sometimes, say, like, for example, like, no fault of your own, you eat something that's rotten food and then you feel terrible for several days. And it's awful. Who hasn't had that happen to them? It's miserable. It's a miserable experience if that goes down. But then usually, unless it's a really, really bad case of food poisoning, your body will rebound. It'll find a way to put things back together, and you'll be able to get in the ring, keep moving, keep doing stuff. And it's a kind of thing that I don't think that I've given a much appreciation to, just even on like a conscious level, right? To think, wow, isn't it wonderful that I still can? That I can be here today talking to you, share thoughts, experiences, learn from what you're interested in, be able to engage and talk and do things. And I mean, look, all around me, harness all kinds of crazy stuff, sound and video, electricity, wires and plastic, circuit boards, data. I mean, all that it takes just to make this happen. We bring this to you live every week on Twitch. We, simul broadcast into Instagram and to some extent on Tumblr, and ultimately then capture this stuff and edit it a little bit and package it and then push it to YouTube so it can be watched forever ad infinitum. And I still can do this. What a gift, right? It's a wonderful thing to think about, that on some level, and of course this isn't the case for everyone, but it still works. And especially because for those who may not have it that well and may be struggling with severe chronic health issues, or maybe aren't lucky enough to still be here. I have to, at least in this moment, regard what I do have. As much as I might complain about certain things, because, things, when you get to be 43 years old, things don't work the same way they did when you were 20. That's just a part of getting older. Things just change, and we're designed that way for a reason. Ultimately, though, to be able to still be there, to be resilient, and to be able to have things go wrong and the body be able to rebound, I have to be grateful for that. It's such a wonderful thing, in spite of especially what we all just went through over the last few years, the perils of this moment. I mean, this isn't meant to be a medical diagnosis show in any way. This is obviously an entertainment show. But at the end of the day, I mean, who doesn't have someone that seemingly in their life is weakened by the COVID-19 pandemic? I mean, almost everywhere I look, almost anyone I know, there are stories of those kinds of problems or disasters. It's a rough, rough stretch. And especially given that and whatever duresses that meant to my life, I'm just unfathomably grateful that it still works and I'm still here. I still get to talk to you. I still get to learn every day, because that's really all I've ever tried to do. I just try to learn. I just try to pull in all the information that I can, try to digest it, try to make some understanding of it, and use that critically to make decisions. What's happening in our world? What is great? How can we share with you what's great? How can we learn from what's great? How can we make more things that are great? That's what all this is about for me. So I have to be grateful that that is the case every day, and still, especially in spite of all that just happened over the last 4 years. People are still getting COVID-19. It doesn't seem to be anywhere near as dangerous as it was, but it is still happening. And so to be able to be here, to live, to eat, to laugh, to love, to have chances, to have things go wrong, but able to rebound and fix them, I have to take the W and say thank you. So that's our story for this week. We're going to get right into our featured interview, but just my usual wrap up before we start the featured interview, I just want to basically say to thank you to everybody who engages with this show, any of the crazy myriad places we do it. We have the live stream here on Twitch that we do every Thursday, usually between 5:30 and 6 p.m. Pacific time. I know we're a little late today, so sorry for that. And then also, we push this on YouTube the following week, either Tuesday or Wednesday, the week after, and the myriad places we post clips of this, whether that's in Instagram or Facebook or in Twitter or in TikTok now, anywhere that you see anything to do with Mixdown at MXDWN. And of course, sometimes even people just within YouTube Shorts. That's like in YouTube's version of TikTok, I guess. Ultimately, wherever you engage with this content, we thank you. If you don't already, please subscribe to us on Twitch, follow us on YouTube. Please keep your dial set here and, keep watching us every week. We're going to bring more headlines, keep looking for interesting stuff happening in the world, more interesting stories, and probably a lot more interviews as time goes on. But ultimately, keep checking back with us every week as we keep going through the rest of 2023. We may take a break at some point, call it a first season, and then start again. But for now, we're, indefinitely just going to be doing this every week on Thursdays. So once again, Thank you so much for joining us. Please come check back with us next week at around 5:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Stick around for our interview. We spoke with Kyle Rowley, Games Director, and Molly Maloney, Principal Narrative Designer from Remedy Entertainment about Alan Wake 2. And if you're a gamer or even someone who's interested in like survival horror or detective horror as a mashup genre, this is a fascinating, and I can tell you, for Zach Dalton, our games editor, and I worked on this, at Summer Game Fest, got to play and experience some of this. It is just gorgeous. It's an incredible looking game, and ultimately it is going to be a big thing this year once it comes out. And this is a big year full of game releases for sure. So please stick around for our featured interview and join us next week for our live broadcast on Thursday on Twitch at MXDWN. Thanks again. So glad to see you well.
Yeah, my name's Kyle Rowley, and I'm the game director of Alan Wake 2, co-directing with Sam and Lake.
Okay. Yes, definitely.
My name is Molly Maloney. I am Principal Narrative Designer on Alan Wake 2.
Tremendous. Okay, and I'm Raymond Flowchat here from MXDWN.com. At the last moment, the last thing of Summer Game Fest, everyone gets to go home, even some people who come quite a ways away for here. And we're here talking with Kyle and Molly from Molly, right? Mm-hmm. Right, good. Kyle and Molly from Alan Wake 2, which is an incredible new sequel that a lot of people have been waiting for a long time. And I had a chance to get into this a little bit earlier and to be able to see some of it, right? I'm sure there is oceans of material in this game in terms of everything that it is, and there's probably a whole hell of a lot that can't be gone into in terms of story and plot. But what was there, I think the first thing I kind of want to touch on is that it's just visually gorgeous. Now, I was saying to one of the publicists on the way in, he's like, what'd you think of it? I was like, it looks incredible. I don't know if my anxiety can cope with it. That was my first immediate thought, was like, this looks nail-biting. Yeah. This looks intense.
I think that's kind of both a good thing and a bad thing in a way. Like, at least for our side, we kind of want to create a horror experience. Sure. But obviously, if you're so scary that you can't play it. One of the things we're actually doing to kind of like help with that is the fact that we do have these this duality in the game, these two hero characters. Saga Anderson, the FBI profiler, comes to the small town of Bright Falls. She's complete newcomer to this whole setup, this whole scenario, knows nothing about what happened in Alan Wake 1. So she's one of our characters, and she's obviously playable in Pacific Northwest. And then we have the Alan experience in the Dark Place, and when you're talking about it's quite anxiety inducing. One of the things that we allow the player to do is actually switch to the other character. So if you feel like this is a bit too much, you could then be like, I'm going to go see what Saga's doing in the daytime, in the Pacific Northwest, and talking to quirky characters. So,
is it that hot swappable?
It's,
after a certain point, there are, so basically you just came from the demo, right?
It was about an hour ago, but yeah.
So you saw in the break room, after a certain point, you will unlock Alan, and then in I believe it's the break rooms, you will be able to swap between the two.
Got it. Now, even as far as Saga walking around the forest, the ambience, the rain, the wind coming up on the lake, I mean, even that was this whole own brand of like, okay, monsters are coming, horrible things are coming right around the corner. And I guess that, there's certainly a big investigative detective element, which is, kind of fascinating in its own respect. And there is, I guess the question is how much of it has that kind of like suspenseful kind of horror vibe to it?
I think that we are looking for a horror experience. I think if we think back to Alan Wake 1, right? Alan Wake 1, it was like a horror story. It did have creepy forests, etc. But one of the things that I think resonated with a lot of players is the fact that it also had a bit of levity. It had like daytime sequences inside the small town of Bright Falls. We had like quirky characters you could talk to. So for us, we're kind of looking to find a balance between, intense horror, which is kind of what we do want to have, but we don't want to have it like all the time. So we're trying to balance that with like some daytime scenes where as a player you maybe get a bit of comedy. So like people like with the over top characters before we then dive back in. So those horror moments are more, as I'd say, extreme when you're kind of not exposed to them all the time. So it's kind of like quite a conscious thing on our side.
So go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just elaborated on that to say like you can only sustain being frightened for so long before you're going to put the controller down and walk away.
Right.
So the levity is really important as a balance to that. Like you can't be truly scared if you also don't have pauses and breaks from being scared. So yeah, that's definitely a core component of the game.
I wouldn't ask you for any guarantees, but roughly half and half.
Of
levity and things that are not scary to scary.
It's still horror game.
Yeah, I would say it's not necessarily half and half, but
Okay,
like
a little more
you
than
know, we're obviously still, and there's different levels of horror, right? There's like extreme, like want you to be really scared versus like this is a bit uneasy. I don't necessarily feel like I'm 100% safe, but I'm not like biting my fingernails of anxiety the whole time.
Got it.
When we talk about like a psychological horror game, the Remedy version of that, we're storytelling. We have a lot of focus on storytelling. This is a storytelling. Words are hard.
Indeed, after
this
this
is a
week.
narrative-driven experience. So it's like one of the core things about that is interesting characters, and how do we tell a story through the environments, and through the combat and things like that. So I would also say that when it comes to the balance, and 50-50 was your question.
Yeah, just
It's not, but it is. It's about providing different forms of respite. So it's like. Not necessarily comedy. I mean, I wouldn't describe this as a comedy game.
Of course not. But, so here's the thing. Like, I go super, super far back. And before to the time where my magazine was Movies and Games and Television, we were just a music magazine. And one of the first times that I went to E3, for whatever reason that I was able to go back in its glory days, I stumbled upon a room. I walked into that room. It was the first day of E3. And as I came into that room, the person who was there, I'm totally forgetting who it was at this point, basically introduced it as, this is the first time we're ever going to show this game we've been working on for years, called Alan Wake.
Okay.
So it was like, I guess, by a point of historical note, that was the first moment a human being outside of the studio got to see it. So that was a long time ago. There was a lot of years in the build-up to that. That didn't happen in a month, right? Games don't generally happen in a month, even in the easiest of times. A lot of time has gone into this one. Now, in imagining this new world, which is, of course, there's new generation technology, there's certainly a higher depth of field, there's just common edge, and also much higher grade televisions, and as far as everything is concerned. What was the biggest challenge in trying to, I don't want to say that there's any impetus to try to make this on par with modern standards, but I mean, it's beautiful and gorgeous and vibrant in a way that I wasn't anticipating. I knew it would be great. I knew it would be scary. I knew it would be interesting. I knew it would be nuanced. But I sat there looking at it, and I was like, this is as good as anything I've seen. How much time did that take to render to that level of detail?
Whilst, we are like, we have our own Northlight engine, which is kind of an in-house engine. We have like an amazing engine team. And I think that when we were thinking about the concept for this game, we were obviously like on a technology level looking at what's coming from the new generation of consoles, and then what does our engine currently do very well, and like what could we improve on. So one of the things that we improved on is like just rendering technology in general. We have a new renderer for the engine. We were looking at like how can we improve the underlying core architecture to allow us to utilize the high speeds of the SSDs, so we can grab data from the game much faster. So we can do things like, insta press of the button, you can switch to the mind place, which is kind of Saga's kind of internal head. So those were kind of important from a technology perspective. And then, on top of that, we knew that we wanted to do the Pacific Northwest, and one of the things we said very early on was like, we want to create the most beautiful looking forests in a game like ever. That was like a statement we were like saying, like from an art direction perspective, that was very important for us, because we spend a lot of time in kind of those primordial forests, and a lot of the atmosphere comes from that kind of, the motion in the wind, the foliage moving. So we built a lot of new technology on our engine that allows us to do like foliage. We built a new terrain editor that allows us to create kind of like, because we've done a lot of games recently which are kind of all internal spaces. Like Control was kind of internal, Quantum Break was mainly based on interior locations. So we wanted to build a lot of technology that allow us to kind of build those kind of visuals that you saw. And the art team and the tech team at Remedy are wizards, and they've done a great job.
Did you want to say something? I want to make sure.
Well, I would also say the part I was thinking of was the overlapping of the worlds. It's like when we talk about the rendering technology, it's also the ability, I mean, you probably saw in the overlap segments, but it's like this beautiful layering of like different levels. That's not possible with previous gen technology. So as to what Kyle is speaking to, we put a lot of work into the engine to allow it to do that, but it's because there was a vision for what we wanted this surreal like dreamscape to feel like. And when you're making a more psychologically horror driven experience, it's the culmination of visuals meets audio meets like all these little components that make that experience.
So, a bizarre comparison, just to go in an odd direction, like The Wizard of Oz, right? Ancient technology, right, when that movie's made. But there's still like a sense of the far, far beyond. And even for a super old movie on super prosaic effects, you feel like that horizon is endless, right? Something about the wizardry of that time is incredible. Within this one, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it felt like you could theoretically go in any direction. It felt like there was an unlimited amount of space to traverse, but I also am guessing it's a little bit more on a rail than all of that. And so correct me if I'm wrong, but you had me fooled if it's not. Like, I honestly was like, I felt like I could just pick a random ass direction and go for ages.
Well, to be clear, it's not an open world game, so your suspicions are correct. Yes. But I can tell you that a ton of work has gone into the hub spaces. Like, we've learned a lot from our previous game Control about like what we wanted to offer, but because this is a narrative focused experience, we wanted spaces that kind of pull you through them and give you a lot of options in terms of what paths you take. What I will say is, so Cauldron Lake is one of 3 hubs that are in the game, and those hubs evolve and change over the course of play, and you can return to them. So things that you see, paths that may be blocked might be unblocked. There are new areas to discover and explore. Exploration was a core pillar of this project. So while it's not open world, as you say, I'm really glad that it felt that way to you, because that represents a lot of work by the team.
I mean, I'm not just saying that to make you happy. I promise. Like, I was there like, I bet there's only a X number of dimensions of choices within the path that we're on here, but I seriously believe there's an endless swamp going in that direction. I bought it for what it's worth.
I mean, in that instance, actually, like it does. That's one of the areas where we actually make the kind of like the world larger over time. So we have to explore more.
Okay. And then as a final question here, just to wrap up, effectively for people who've been waiting a long time, because Alan Wake has its own core of fans that have been there very loyal for a very long time, what is the thing as far as what they're going to get in this experience versus the first one, beyond any modern enhancements in technology, but in terms of is this bigger story, darker, more nuanced story?
I think that compared to the first one, we've put a lot more emphasis on making sure that the story, the horror story we're trying to tell, and the gameplay that you'll kind of experience that story through are much more better aligned. They're more cohesive experience. The first game was a horror story. It was slow paced, but the kind of action gameplay kind of like contradicted it in a way. It kind of felt a bit disjointed. So we really wanted to try and make sure that we were creating a game experience that allowed the story to be told through the gameplay as much as possible. That's why we introduced concepts like, the mind place and the case board, because those are concepts which make sense from the idea of being an FBI profiler, but they're also game mechanics that the player actively interacts with, and we tell the story through those mechanics. So we're much more trying to kind of create a kind of like wider experience where you have more options and things to do, but with the gameplay and the story are kind of much more cohesive.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the biggest game that Remedy has ever made. So there's more there than we've ever done before. But also, like, our core theme on this game is duality. You've got 2 playable protagonists. You've got 2 worlds. You've got these 2 stories that echo and mirror each other in ways that I'm not even sure the characters themselves understand. There is just a lot of content in this game.
It looks like it.
Yeah, it feels like it when we're building it. So I think that's what my elaboration would be.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate all your time. Thank you so much. I cannot wait to play it. If my own anxiety threshold lets me, I hope to. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not as confident as you are myself, but thank you, and we can't wait to see it, play it, and experience it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Bye.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
No, thank you for your patience with all of this.
No worries.